Hello everyone, you're listening to the Eiffel Tower podcast. My name's Oliver G. This is a show all about Paris. I'd like to say it's perfect armchair travel for all you Paris dreamers out there that fancy escaping, even if just for half an hour every week. And today's guest is kind of the perfect example of Paris dreaming because she literally wrote the book on the topic. I got Katrina Lawrence, an Australian beauty journalist who fell in love with Paris at the age of 5 and has kept coming back ever since. Her book, Paris Dreaming, is a little bit about her love for the city and how it's inspired her. Now, I recorded this a little bit earlier in the year. I'm releasing it now. I'm on holiday in Sweden. I'll tell all the personal news and read some emails and all that kind of stuff at the end of the episode. But before we start, I just want to do a quick shout out. This show is brought to you by the Patreon members. No adverts. I learned the interesting way that advertisers, especially with pandemics and stuff, you never know what will happen with an advertiser. But one thing you can count on is the listeners. So if you guys want to get a whole lot more out of the Eiffel Tower, consider signing up on Patreon. And today's guest, Katrina Lawrence, is a long-time Patreon supporter. She gets it. Thank you, Katrina, and it was really nice to meet you. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the episode. But if you're already a member, I recommend you go and log on now because the scrolls, this new idea that I've been working on, you know what a scroll is, right? It's kind of like this document of secrets that you scroll through. And that's exactly what I've got for the episodes. In this one, I'm looking at it now. She talks about the Cour de Commerce, which is a cool street in the 6th arrondissement. And I linked even to the time I did a video with Stephen Clark down there talking about French revolutions. So this whole scroll idea is giving you some extra rabbit holes to jump down. This is the second one we've done. I'm very proud of it. My little brother Eddie helped. Shout out to you, Eddie. And look, I'll talk about it at the end. Katrina Lawrence talking about Paris. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's do it. Katrina Lawrence, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Does anyone ever tell you sound a bit like Kylie Minogue?
Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy to hear.
Really?
Yeah, she's one of my favorites.
So when I put these headphones on, because we've been talking before we put the headphones on, but then as soon as I hear you in my ears here, I'm like, Kylie Minogue, there's something. I don't know, where are you from?
Melbourne.
Is that where she's from?
So same, but don't ask me to sing because I cannot sing like Kylie Minogue.
Is she from Melbourne as well?
Yeah, she is.
Oh, well, that's cool. Okay. I was born in Melbourne, you know.
Yeah, snap.
But I, I'm not born and bred, just born.
It's funny because I now live in Sydney and sometimes people in Sydney ask me where I'm from.
Right.
So there must be maybe, I don't know, certain parts of Melbourne where we sound a little bit different.
How interesting. But from Melbourne or Sydney or Australia, somehow we're both sitting in Paris today. Both Australians, both in Paris, both having just had a long conversation about this city. And you've written a whole book, Paris Dreaming, that's in front of me.
Yes.
So you've thought about this city a lot.
I've thought about this city pretty much every day since I was 5.
That's it says in the book that this is your spiritual home.
It is. It's never actually been my home. I've lived here. Well, it wasn't really living, but I was here for 3 months when I was 21. I did a language course.
Right.
And
in Paris was this?
Yeah, in Saint-Germain. And I think that I never really wanted to live here because it's always been my dream. It's been somewhere I've wanted to come at least once a year if I could wing it and afford it. And it was just something I kind of dipped in and out of. And Australia has always been home. I'm an only child. I'm really close to my parents. And I used to read books about women who would, flit off to Paris or do like what you've done and make this amazing home for themselves on the other side of the world. And obviously Sarah Turnbull's Almost French was a huge seller in Australia.
Yeah. I think that was all over the world. That was a huge
It actually was. I think it sold hundreds of thousands.
Wow.
But I always knew that wasn't going to be me and that my story was going to be different. And I think I also wanted to keep Paris a bit of a dream, thus the title Paris Dreaming.
Like a mistress or a mister for you maybe.
Kind of.
That's weird because a lot of people, like you said, a lot of people have this dream of moving here, but you seem to have had the dream more to have it as a place to go.
Well, I think I was lucky enough to come here a lot when I was young with my parents and then take myself here because before the euro, it was really cheap. So it was easy to be able to afford a holiday regularly here. And so it always was quite real in a way. But I didn't want it to be too real. And I had a friend when I was in my early 20s who was similar to me. And she moved over here to go to the Sorbonne. And it was like our dream. But she was back really quickly because she just said, once you're living here and you're paying bills and you're in a little attic and it's winter and it's cold, it's reality. It's not the dream anymore. And maybe that's, for better or worse, has kind of coloured my view of whether I should live or not in Paris. But having said that, I've always had this kind of vision in the back of my head that I might have a little pied-à-terre here when I'm like in my 60s or 70s because I think that it's a city you can grow old in, and it's a beautiful, it's if you're young, you can go out and party and have a great time, but it's also a very slow city and you can hang about in cafes all day long. You can go to great museums. So maybe one day I will, but right now I just love dipping in and dipping out.
I think you're exactly right. I see a lot of older people in the city who look like they're having a good time.
Yeah.
And I don't mean at the discotheque. I mean, strolling through the parks and, feeding the birds or going to the coffee shops or whatever. I think you might be right.
Well, my last trip here, I brought my mother-in-law.
Right.
And she's a Paris dreamer as well. She actually came to Paris as an au pair when she was 21 from suburban Brisbane.
Right.
And it was like, the film Sabrina, where Audrey Hepburn goes over and has this amazing epiphany in Paris and La Vie en Rose and all of that. And it was the same for my mother-in-law, and she was au pairing for this really wealthy family out in the 16th, and she had her first taste of great bread and sole meunière and all of these revelations. But anyway, reality took her back home. But 50 years later, she was finally able to come back, and we did all of these things she used to do, like go to Palais Garnier and go up the stairs she used to go to when she went to the opera and the ballet. And she was saying, it was as fun back then in the early 60s when she was going out with her friends to all of these cafes and nightclubs as it is now, being a kind of older, slower lady.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think it's a city that suits all ages. It's made me think of two things, though. What was this? Why is Audrey Hepburn always coming to Paris in her movies? What's the deal with that?
I think she personally loved it so much, and I think that she is your ultimate honorary Parisian.
Is she?
Like, when people say Parisian is a state of mind as well as a state of place. Like, to me, Audrey Hepburn personifies Parisian grace. But she's never lived here, but she's come here a lot. And I think that's why maybe she gravitated towards movies with scenes in Paris.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was there must be, I wonder if especially people listening to us right now and listening to this show in general, are dreamers of Paris. And I wonder if they dream of living here, or if they prefer the dream of living here than actually living here.
Well, I guess a lot of women, similar to what I was just saying, know that they've got obligations at home, and maybe 40, 50 so years ago they couldn't afford to come here, and then all of a sudden life happened and kids happened, and my book actually was released in Australia a couple of years ago, and so I have had the chance the past couple of years to meet women who've read the book, and many of them have been women in their 50s and 60s who have literally been daydreaming of Paris for decades, and they're finally empty nesters and trying to find someone to go to Paris with because they've been dreaming about it, but they never had the ability to go, but they kind of felt like they still knew it because it's in so many movies, like all the Audrey Hepburn movies. Yeah. There are so many paintings. There are so many books set in Paris. So I guess that gives a lot of women their fix. And if you do come to Paris every now and then, you kind of take little bits of the way of life and you take it back home with you. Like
an Australian bowerbird collecting blue things.
Kind of. It just teaches you about, I don't know, I think you start to appreciate the simple pleasures, like the pleasures of eating just a good piece of bread.
Yeah.
And so you take those home with you and you try to make these little Parisian rituals for yourself, even if you're in suburban Sydney.
Yeah. So what prompted writing the book, which I've got sitting in front of me now, Paris Dreaming. Good subtitle, What the City of Light Taught Me About Life, Love and Lipstick.
Well, so speaking of lipstick, I was working in women's magazines and I was a beauty journalist, and I had been for 20 years. And it was about the time when media was rapidly changing. So a lot of magazines were closing down, everything was going online, and long form was kind of dying, and it just wasn't really inspiring me anymore. And it was just churning copy, and usually for online, and then you had to SEO everything, and it was just kind of killing my soul a little bit. And one of my publications closed down and I lost another job. And it just happened at this time when I had a little bit of savings. I was going into winter and I just thought, I'm just going to go into hibernation and see if I can finally write a book. And anyone who works in words or anyone who just loves books always thinks that's the dream, one day to write a book. So I was like, okay, right, it's now or never. And I knew that I wanted to write about a passion. I didn't want to write about beauty because beauty had been my job. And it turned out to be Paris. It just made sense. And I was talking to a publisher about all the reasons why I love Paris and what Paris has taught me over my life and inspiring Parisians I've read about. And one of them said to me, that's great, but I want to know the backstory. I want to know about how you got to come to see that. So I went back to the drawing board and I looked back at all of the holidays I'd had in Paris and all of the times I'd been here. And there had been quite a few, but a few, 10, stood out as being quite symbolic, retrospectively.
10 trips,
10,
yeah,
actually
right.
11, because the first chapter is 2 early ones combined.
Right.
And they happened at specifically key life stages for me. In retrospect, I didn't know it at the time necessarily. And I realized that by coming here at certain times in my life, at certain ages and in certain sort of at certain life stages, I kind of picked up life lessons. So, and I'd often stayed in different areas. So the book structure ended up being one chapter for each of these holidays and what I was kind of learning at the time and who I was reading. Like, when I was at university and I was reading Simone de Beauvoir. And so she kind of came into that chapter. And it all sort of naturally progressed from there. So the book is technically a personal memoir, but I wanted it to be, this is my take on the story of Paris and Parisian women. And so it's like probably only 30% at the most personal memoir. The rest is like lots of history, lots of cultural tidbits, lots and lots of trivia, just things
You did a lot of research for, I can tell.
I definitely did. And I'd done a lot of reading over the years, but I had to reread everything and fact check. And I probably read a good 100 books while doing it because I just wanted it to be, it wasn't going to be a dry kind of footnoted type book. That was, the publishers were clear about that from the start. And they were the ones who wanted it to be a bit personal memoirish because they wanted a narrative to it and they wanted the personal aspect helps you handhold people through lots of history and lots of facts. And we wanted a sort of, a girlish tone to it.
What's wrong with the male readers?
Yeah, sorry. As soon as I said that, I thought, oh, sorry, guys. Well, I guess because I feel like Paris is such a feminine city. Yeah. And I've always, I don't know why, but I've always read books by women or books about women. Right. And I think it's because I don't have any sisters. I'm an only child. And I'm really pro-sisterhood. And so it just became this kind of like feminine book. And I have had some guys say that they've read it because they love Paris. And I go into not just beauty and lipstick and dresses, but I do also go into politics and philosophy. So there are lots of facts in there that would relate to any Paris lover. But I did very much write it in my tone. And I guess because my background is in women's magazines and beauty particularly, it's probably quite a feminine tone.
Why is Paris such a feminine city?
Okay, so this is the interesting thing. It's actually historically and grammatically, it's masculine. Right. So if you see a restaurant playing on the whole old Paris concept, it's usually called something like Au Vieux Paris. Yeah. But I always thought it was feminine because, well, it looks feminine. But also once when I was a teenager and I was just starting to learn French, I was in a taxi and I said to the taxi driver, oh, Paris est si beau. Yeah. And he was like, no, Paris est belle. Paris est une femme. Right. So I was like, oh, okay. And from then on, I just assumed she is grammatically a woman because, you've got these lacy balconies and you've got these lamps that look like jewelry and everything's just so beautiful. But I found out while I was writing the book that it's actually technically masculine.
How interesting. I think I wonder, sometimes I wonder, I remember someone said to me that he said I was one of the few guys, straight guys, that are doing anything about Paris. As in like a podcast or a blog or whatever. He said it was mostly women and gay men who were doing all this stuff. Do you think that's got something to do with so why if Paris is a woman, why aren't more guys talking about it? Because guys talk about women. You know what I mean?
That's interesting. I do think that Parisian men aren't hung up on the whole macho-ness that, say, Australian men and maybe American men are. There's not this pressure to sort of, be really masculine and not wear pink jumpers and all the rest. So I really like that about it. Like, everyone's just so at ease here and they're not trying to prove either way.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me, I had this guy, Greg, on the show talking about the Parisian man, and he was, he's talking about how he's quite happy to wear a scarf. And
there you go.
Whereas in some other countries, I think he lived in New York as well, he said a guy in New York would maybe sort of reel at the thought of dressing like that. It's an interesting city, an interesting...
it really is.
This whole masculine, feminine thing. So when it comes to women, in particular, while we're talking about women... and the way they dress, the way they are, would you say that Parisian women and, let's say, Sydney women are quite similar, or...?
Well, I'd say in Sydney it's much more casual, and it's such a beachy kind of place. You will see a bit more skin. And in Paris, and this applies to men as well, I think, I feel like everyone dresses up. And I don't mean in a formal way. It's like in a really groomed way. And someone once said to me, Paris is like a stage and everyone wants to look the part. And the locals are very proud of their city. And so you'll never see a woman, say, walk out of the apartment building in her sneakers, carrying her work shoes and with her makeup bag that she takes out on the train, doing her makeup on the train. Like, everyone is like, ready to go as soon as they step out, because there's that sort of public versus private split, and you won't see people wearing their daggy tracksuit that they might wear inside.
Yeah, people don't wear their pajamas to nip down to the shop
which you see all the time in Australia.
People go around barefoot in Australia. That would never happen here.
Yeah, even in the middle of winter. I'm in Bondi, so it's a little bit more casual than most suburbs, but you see bare feet all the time.
But is that because the beach is right there, or...? I remember when I lived in Australia, I know even when I wasn't going to the beach, I'd been barefoot in like a shop before. And now when I think about it, I can't believe that I did that.
Yeah, that still happens.
Yeah. Australia's so laid back, though.
Yeah.
You can't really compare.
No, do you remember that hilarious scene in Almost French? We were just talking about Sarah Turnbull, where she leaves the house to go and get some bread or croissants, and her future husband is like, oh, what are you wearing? And she just had on like her old tracksuit, and she's like, why? And he's like, it's rude to the baker. You need to dress up. Right. And that was the moment at which she realised how different Australians and French are with their dressing. I think that's
how David Leibovitz's first, My Sweet Life in Paris, I think.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, it begins with the moment that the moment I first knew I was becoming French wasn't when and then he listed them all. He goes, no, it was when I had to take the garbage out and I got changed to do it.
I loved that bit.
Yeah. There's definitely something in it. I don't know if there was a moment like that for me, but it's definitely a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but I love that. It's like everyone conspires to make the city more beautiful. Like it even goes to the garbage collectors. There are so many of them here compared to, say, other cities. And that reminds me, I was taking a photo of this gorgeous old facade the other day, and one of the garbage guys came up to me and he said, oh, it's a shame that sign's there. And I was like, what do you mean? And I looked more closely, and there was like a stop sign right on the corner that was in the middle of the shot. He was like, that would be such a beautiful shot if it wasn't for that stop sign.
Right.
And I was just thinking, only in Paris. Like, nobody else around the world would even think that.
Right.
It was just such, just one of those little moments of everyday life that is quite enlightening.
Yeah, a little bit of Paris magic.
The bigger picture.
Yeah. Where's that? Was this also on the left bank?
This was actually at this gorgeous little old shop that's now a hotel in the Third.
Okay.
Yeah, I do sometimes leave the left bank.
I was going to say, because before we pressed record, you were singing the praises of the 6th arrondissement.
I know, it's so cliche.
But that's all right. I want to hear why you like it so much.
It's like I come to Paris. So Paris Dreaming is the name of the book, and I love the dream of Paris, which to me is the history of Paris. And I feel like sometimes I have these invisible virtual reality goggles on that take me back in time. And so when I walk around the streets, I love reading the plaques and thinking about the people who used to live there and looking at the cafes or sitting in there and wondering if I'm sitting where the ghost of Simone de Beauvoir would have sat. And there's just Saint-Germain. It's like there are so many A-list ghosts there.
A-list ghosts.
There's one street where Charles Baudelaire lived twice.
Right.
And I love snooping around. I'm always like pushing the old coach doors. And I remember I think David Downey, he gave a tip once. If you ring the bell on a Monday when a lot of delivery people are coming, someone will just let you in. And I'm not brave enough to do that. But still, I'll kind of lean on them. And if they open, I'm like, I'm just going to pretend to be a naive tourist.
Yeah.
And I've been chased out by a few concierges in my time. But anyway, one of these buildings I went into, and it was one that Charles Baudelaire used to live in. And there was this gorgeous old man coming out. And I said, oh, excuse me, monsieur, do you live in the building where Baudelaire used to live? And he was like, oh, Baudelaire lived all over Paris.
Yeah.
Like it was just this old thing kind of thing, which I loved. But Georges Sand lived on that street. And I just love picturing her stomping around the streets in her suit and her men's shoes. And Colette lived around the corner. And then, as I said, Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre and existentialism. And I really, being from Australia, and obviously we have an ancient Indigenous culture and history, but in terms of settled Australia, we're really young.
Sure.
We're really new, and we don't have those layers of architectural history and cultural history.
And I wonder
that
if that's
here.
why so many Australians and Americans are so charmed by the history of places like Paris, just because we don't have the same kind of history.
I think so. And also, I mean, look, Paris is changing. It's much more multicultural, but America and Australia, in terms of settled America and Australia, are countries of immigrants. So we all come from all over the place, which is really exciting and fabulous and great as a melting pot. But it's not as though we have his family histories that go back in one place hundreds and hundreds of years, which you might get in France.
Sure,
and
good point.
Yeah, so I think that there's this sort of like, we're young and we're casual. And sometimes I feel anyway, it would be nice to be living somewhere where there's real etiquette and customs and traditions and rituals. Whereas Australia, at least, is a bit like, oh, she'll be right, you know.
Isn't it so that a lot of I don't know, maybe you know some French people in Bondi, but they love Australia, and then people like you who say, oh, I love the etiquette of the French people, and they think you're mad.
Exactly.
Right.
I've spoken to a few of them I've got to know really well over the past few years, including Clementine, a wonderful illustrator who is a former Parisian. She did the illustration on the cover.
Right.
And she now
lovely illustration.
Oh, she's so amazing. And it's like she's got an inner Australian. And she and her husband and 2 children moved to Australia a few years ago, and she's at the beach every day.
Yeah.
So she goes and does her work, goes to the beach, surfs, picks up her kids from school, and they're Australian citizens now. They're so happy to be there because she felt that it was stifling here for them. And she thinks I'm crazy for not seeing what we've got in Australia. But it's like, I guess it's the grass is greener, right?
It's interesting because I wonder also, like, people like you and maybe people like me as well, if we're more interested in this etiquette or the differences, like observing it and being like, that's an intriguing oddity, or if it's that we want to be part of it. Like, I don't know if I'm just obsessed with
maybe
the fact that everyone says bonjour and whatever, and I want to be part of it, or if I'm just obsessed by it. I don't know. Like, you know?
It could be like every time I read a John Baxter book and he
Right.
talks about joining into this French family, I have this tiny little happy for him, obviously, but this little pang of envy at the same time.
Yeah. Baxter, old Baxter, good old friend of the show, John Baxter.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think next time you talk to Clementine, maybe see if she, like, you know what I mean? I don't know if it's that you think the grass is greener or that you just want to kind of look at the grass closer. Doesn't mean you want to frolic in it. You know what I mean?
Well, I guess that's a difference between people who are happy just to visit Paris and dip in and out, or actually don't want to live in the home
Right.
where they've been born.
Right.
And I know a lot of people in Sydney, whether they're from England or America or France, some actually from Italy, and it's like they're better suited to Australia than where they're from. So I guess some people feel like home isn't home.
Yeah. Well, I get a lot of, even last night I was in a bar and the bartender heard my accent and he said, he said, he switched to English. He's like, where are you from? I said, Australia. He goes, oh, I love it. I love it. I spent a year, I don't know what he did, picking berries or something like that. And then they asked why I'm here. You know, they find it really odd.
Yeah. I was at Café de Flore the other day, so of course I was at Café de Flore, and one of the waiters was asking me all about Australia because he's like, oh, it's my dream for my wife and I to go there. And I was like, but you work at Café de Flore. Why would you? And he's like, why wouldn't you? You're crazy not to like it. So
that's interesting. Tell me something you said before we hit record. Is you said that when you come to Paris, you're not interested in going to the hipster cafes in the 11th and having avocado sandwiches because you can do that at home. You want to go to Café de Flore, whereas like it's mostly tourists that go there.
Yeah, I know, and it does slightly take away from me pretending it's 40 years ago when I go to Café de Flore and I'm surrounded by all sorts of accents except French. But I feel drawn to it. And my friends who live here, who I always organise to meet, I'm always suggesting, do I go Café de Flore or somewhere in Saint-Germain? And a few times they've said to me, oh, we just need to get you out of there. You need to come over our way. There are so many cool cafes, but I have them at home. I can go and sit on a crate in a gritty cafe and have my soy chai and my avocado toast. And if I was living in Paris, I'd be doing that all the time. I wouldn't be going to Café de Flore. But if you're only here for a week, you want to live the dream, right?
Yeah.
You want to be sitting where Ernest Hemingway used to have his sherry, because you know it's cliche, but only in Paris you can do something like that.
That's cool. Tell me to finish up as time's slipping away. I feel like you probably know Saint-Germain better than I do. So how would you spend an afternoon there? Not you necessarily. I mean, how would you recommend someone listening would go, what they should go and see?
An afternoon.
Yeah.
Well, I'd suggest maybe first thing before it gets too busy, if I can go back a bit earlier in the day.
I think you can get away with it.
Okay. There's this great little strip that's just off Rue Saint-André-des-Arts. And it goes between that street and then south to Boulevard Saint-Germain. And it's called Cours du Commerce Saint-André. Mm-hmm. And it's this gorgeous little quaint cobbled strip. And it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it because so much has happened there. The guillotine was tested there. Jean-Paul Marat had his revolutionary paper published there. Le Procope, which is the first cafe ever where the philosophers came up with the idea of the French encyclopedia and where the catchphrase of liberty, equality, fraternity was coined. And it's really lovely to be there before it gets too busy. But the main reason is there's this little courtyard that I love just off to the left, and it's private now, so it's locked. But it's called Cours de Rohan, Rohan. And if you kind of loiter, you might find a nice resident will let you in if you kind of, look polite and demure. And it's a kind of a series of 3 courtyards. And in the middle, there's a beautiful red brick building from the mid-16th century that King Henry built for his mistress Diane de Poitiers. And it's got the only remaining... I can't remember what it's called in French. Oh, that's right, pas de moule. So it's like this metal contraption that you used to stand on to get up onto a horse.
Right.
And it's the only remaining one in there. So if you can get away with somehow getting into there, that is such a gorgeous, unique thing to do.
So it's like a hidden alley off a fairly hidden alley already.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's
I've never been in there. I've been in the courtyard, but not the secret bit.
Oh, and the other amazing thing about it is that, the film Gigi with Leslie Caron?
Yes, but I've never seen it.
Oh, okay. Well, there's this scene where she lives with her grandmother, and the stairs that she runs up to go to her house, that's filmed there as well.
Is that the movie that starts in like the Bois de Boulogne with horses and stuff?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, I think I've seen a bit of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Rest of the afternoon then? Where are we off to?
And then I would do probably breakfast at...
breakfast in the afternoon.
Oh,
Katrina.
sorry, we're in the afternoon. Okay, sorry, I thought I was
You're
back in
still
the
on
morning.
Australian time.
I am a bit jet lagged. Well, I love de Magot for afternoon tea. They bring out that amazing tray of pastries.
Isn't it like mega expensive there?
Yes.
What is it like? So what does a coffee
Especially
cost?
when
No
you're
idea.
Australian.
What is it? What's a coffee?
Okay, I don't have coffee. I usually have a tea.
Okay.
And it's probably like €7.
Yeah,
Does that sound right? Yeah, but...
That sounds reasonably ridiculous for a tea.
Because it's usually just hot water and then they give you a tea bag.
Yeah. They bought from Monoprix next door, or
Probably.
Okay.
But the tray of pastries is just amazing. It's called Pierre Hermé, and I can't remember the other brand of beautiful pastries. And then apéro at Café de Flore,
right?
For sure. They always bring you little chips, and the waiters are just such, like, they really play up to that whole, like, image of the French cafe waiter, and they're fabulous. And then I really love the street Rue de Bussy. It used to be a market street, though. Only on a Saturday you see one poor lone cheese man with his red and white tablecloth and his cheese. Like, everything else is really just a cafe now, but it's just great and lively. Oh, and one more thing I just have to add is if you go down Rue Bonaparte to the School of Fine Arts, École des Beaux-Arts, you're allowed to go in even if you're not a student. You can go into this, it's called the Cours du Mûrier, and Mûrier is mulberry tree, I think. And it goes back to about 1600, and Catherine de' Medici's daughter, Queen Margot, La Reine Margot, she had it built because that used to be her land. She was like the first one who made that area really cool and glamorous, and that's quite special.
And was there a movie about that or something as well?
Yeah, Isabella Gianni from, I think it was the early 90s. It's really gory. There's so much blood in it.
What's the movie called?
La Reine Margot.
We need to have a movie list to go with this episode.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. It does make you feel a bit queasy, but it's...
Why is that? Like head chopping off or something?
Yeah, so after her marriage to the future King Henry IV, a few days later, Catherine de' Medici and her son, the king, ordered the mass killing of all of the Protestants who had come to town for the wedding. So it was the Saint Bartholomew Day massacre, which happened like all around Paris, but specifically in the Louvre courtyard. And like tens of thousands of people, I think, were killed. Yes. So, yeah, it's quite graphic, but it's a really a key moment in French history, and the movie's just amazing. And Isabella Gianni, of course.
I'll have to check that out.
So beautiful.
But what we'll all check out first, if you guys haven't already, is Paris Dreaming, the guest and the author of the book, Katrina Lawrence. Thank you very much for coming on the show. And
thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine. There you have it. Thanks very much, Katrina. I noticed at the very start of the episode that I said Katrina sounded like Kylie Minogue. Kind of interesting to see that as I scroll through the scroll, my brother Eddie, who made it, seems to have put some Kylie Minogue information in there, which he won't be getting away with next time. But everything mentioned in that episode is there. Go and find it, patreon.com/The Eiffel Tower. It also has links to find the book. So the name of the book again, Paris Dreaming by Katrina Lawrence. Lovely cover, lovely book. When I spoke to her, I hadn't read it. Now I have. I think it's perfect for anyone who is out there dreaming of Paris. Go and check it out. Paris Dreaming. Now, as I typically do, I've got some reviews and news and emails, that kind of stuff to read out. I picked out two that I quite liked from this past week. The first one was from Bernie Duhaime. I guess that's a French name, Duhaime. Duhaime, maybe, if you're in America. Anyway, Bernie writes in, he says, Oliver, I just joined your membership. So he joined on Patreon. Just joined your membership after having read your book. I actually laughed so much at your description of how to sound like a Frenchman that I cried. My wife and I really enjoyed your book, Bon Courage. And I responded, and I just thought it was great that he cried. And we got chatting. He said, having lived in Paris, I knew each of the metros that you mentioned, and he's talking, of course, in the book I talk about the bit of how you say metro names if you want to sound French. He says, the metro names that you mentioned, I imagine myself actually doing the horse puff, making the chants of a monk, and finally using putain and merde words. When I read that in the book, I immediately put the book down, grabbed my tablet, and searched for your video. Found it! Continue to laugh for a fairly long time. Regards to Lena. I'll do that for you, Bernie. Thanks for signing up on Patreon. And thanks for reading the book. Laughed so much that you cried. I love that. Here's another one. This one's from Elizabeth. Elizabeth Olivier. She says, good morning, Oliver. Before the pandemic, I'd planned to spend 3 months in Paris improving my French and working at our offices. Blah, 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 blah. Very disappointed the trip was cancelled. Instead of boarding the plane on May 3rd, I found the Eiffel Tower. Thus began my exploration of France along with you, Lena, and your guests. And you, collectively, have been my company during our lockdown in South Africa. which is still ongoing. I'm sorry to hear that. It's taken around 3 months. Okay, get this. It's taken around 3 months, but I finally caught up on all 217 podcasts on Friday, 31st of July. 217, that's crazy. So basically, thanks to you, I was able to spend 3 months in France. French lessons included thanks to the season with French Today. Yes. I'm pleased to report there's not been any episodes I've not enjoyed, but my favorites are the ones where you chat to French locals and get their take on what's happening in their country. Don't get me wrong, the episodes with Anglophones are valuable, but the locals have a very different take on life in their country. And then she goes on to recommend some people to talk to that I'm looking into. And she says, I've today officially become an Earful Tower member and look forward to exploring the content available. Patreon supporters, I hope that you and Lena enjoy the rest of your holiday. Kind regards, Elizabeth. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your support and for listening to all 217 episodes of the show. 218 now, I guess. But that's really lovely to hear. It always sort of boggles my mind when I get emails from people who've binged the show. But what I often respond and what I encourage you guys to do, if you have also listened to them all, tell me your favorite episode. Anyone, especially if you've listened to it in a short period of time like Elizabeth had, I find it super intriguing to know what you like the best. Because for me, I've done these shows over 3.5 years now, and it's gone on so long that I can't quite even remember my own favorites. So I love to hear what you guys say is your favorites. And that's been a bit of a theme, especially on Patreon when I asked what to do for next season. People saying, talk to the locals. I know my mum loves when I talk to French people. She thinks they have a whole different way of sort of talking, which I guess is true. So they're French. But yeah, I like that. I think just on that note, when I started the show, I think it was pretty hard for me to get French people on the show because they didn't get what it was or what I was doing, whereas it was a lot easier to get expats and bloggers and YouTubers on because they were doing the same kind of thing, so they got it. But now as the show's growing, hey, maybe I can keep getting more French people. Let's keep shooting for the mayor as well. That's the ultimate goal, isn't it? Or the president? Anyway, that's it for now. 2 emails from people who've supported on Patreon and read the book and listened to the episodes. I encourage you all to do the same. If you want to unlock those scrolls, patreon.com/The Earful Tower. Otherwise, just subscribe. Subscribe to the show. Tell your friends. That means a lot to me too. Thanks very much for listening. I'll be back next week with more. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.